Amy, is everyone in now? I cannot see because of the graphic on the screen.
We're ready for you.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online today, Monday, August 12th. I'm David Blair, a friend of New Hampshire Peace Action and a frequent attender of these meetings. Tonight, we are very delighted and honored to welcome our two speakers, Shiri Ourian, the Executive Director of the American Friends of the Parents Circle, and Beth Schuman, founder of American Friends of Combatants for Peace, former Executive Director, and now on the advisory board of that group. They will be talking about Israeli-Palestinian organizations working for peace at this very difficult and tragic time, helping us to understand how people who are supposed to hate each other can still continue to work for peace. And we're very grateful to you both for being here tonight to share with us. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more just and peaceful future for us all, a future based on cooperation rather than competition and conflict, a future where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. In that spirit of respect, we'd like to start with an acknowledgement that we're doing our work on Ndakina, the traditional ancestral home of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples. We honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the Alnobak, the people who have stewarded Ndakina throughout the generations. I'd like to remind you quickly about our Zoom guidelines. We love it when you keep your video on, but we will keep your audio muted to start with. You can use the chat to ask questions, and later we will do hand raising. We'll be hearing from Beth and Shiri for about half an hour, and then we will move to questions and answers. And some of them will be taken from the chat, and others we will be just taking live as you speak. And there will be a short closing, as you know, if you have attended these questions before. So with that, again, I would like to introduce Beth, who is I'll repeat your credentials again, Beth. You are the founder of American Friends of Combatants for Peace, former executive director, and now on the advisory board. Beth will start, and then Shiri, who is the current ED of American Friends of the Parents Circle, will follow. And we'll hear from you for about 30 minutes, and then we will move into our question and answers. So please join me in welcoming Beth Schuman and Shiri Ourian. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for having us. I really feel grateful and honored to get to stay in touch and connected and share with all of you. So Amy reached out to me a couple months ago about doing this talk, and I immediately thought, well, I'm not, in the day-to-day of this world anymore. But my good friend Shiri is. So I said, I'll do it, but let's bring Parent Circle in also. So I really want to give space to that and to honor that in this. I'll give you a little bit about my background and history and then pass the mic to her. So back in 2016, I had been living in India doing something totally different. I went back to the States to get my master's, and one of my professors took us to see the film Disturbing the Peace. So I like to joke I was the organization's first groupie. I went to every event on that tour. I was like, why aren't we collecting names and registrations, guys? And their response was, well, why don't you join us and start an American Friends organization? Combatants for Peace was about 20 people at the time. They just had this big film made about them, but the movement was tiny. Like, it was really just 20 or 30 guys, men specifically. I don't use guys. I use it specifically. Sorry, my dog is loud. Bella, shh. And Yeah, at the time, way back then, it really was in some ways more of a social gathering than it was an activist group. And there was a real push at the time to say, well, can we really make a difference? Can we be activists? Can we move the needle? Stop. Um, and so that was really the process for the last, well, for the 7 or so years that I was with them, was really shifting into becoming activists. I remember when Bibi announced the annexation, and our executive director at the time said, "We're going to stop that." And I was like, "Yonatan, like, really?" Like, this was our Israeli executive director. I was like, when have we really been able to actually, stop a settlement or close a checkpoint or any of this? And he's like, "You'll see, we're stopping that." And a couple of months later, um, we did. So that was like the annexation didn't go forward. Like that was huge for us. I left my role as executive director in March before October 7. We hired somebody amazing, Tiffany, who I know spoke to you guys recently and is really, really wonderful. At that point, I joined the advisory board. Um, and I also recently joined the board of an organization called Young Voices, which is a shared society organization in Jaffa that brings together Israeli Jewish kids with Israeli-Palestinian kids, specifically at-risk kids. So kids from broken homes, impoverished families, kids who really don't have a place to go, don't have access to food, like really, really the at-risk, the kids who need the most help, and brings them together to do after-school programming, specifically around theater, and does a lot of shared society work. So making sure to bring Palestinian and Jewish kids, bringing them together in this way. And I just think it's really powerful. Yonatan brought me into that one, the former executive director of Combatants. So we're embarking on a new project together. Um, yeah, so that's been a little bit of my journey. In between those things, I don't know if any of you has heard of Mejdi tours or been on a Mejdi tour, but they started a nonprofit arm called Interact. So I helped them launch the Interact Education Center, which if you haven't brought Aziz Abu Sara and Maoz, you should definitely bring them. I highly recommend it. Incredible speakers, both also in the parent circle, speaking of. So lots of interconnected, overlapping worlds of people just sort of shifting from one place to another. But that's a little bit of my background and experience, and I'd love to turn it over to Shiri to really talk more about Parent Circle, which I have to say, she and I worked very, very closely for many years. When I first started this job, she was already like senior executive director in Parent Circle. I would call her for advice. We worked together on the Joint Memorial Day for many years. Um, yeah, so I can't more highly recommend a colleague in the field than I can her. So passing the mic.
Thank you, Beth. I don't think I've ever had such a warm introduction before. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you, the New Hampshire Peace Action, for inviting me here today. It's an honor to speak to all of you. Gosh, there's so much to say. Beth, I'm glad I got to hear you go first because I didn't know your combatant's story, like how you got to get into the organization. So I'll just tell you a little bit about me first, and then I'll talk about the parent circle. I I was living in Israel. I was getting my master's at the Hebrew University in public health, and um, I went to the launch of a joint Israeli-Palestinian public health magazine that the World Health Organization was putting together. And they needed someone who was fluent in English with a public health background who was really passionate about Israeli and Palestinian peace. So those aren't like a lot of check boxes that a lot of people fit, but I happen to fit. And so I immediately jumped at the opportunity And that project led me to get to know and highlight many peace, cross-border human rights organizations in the field. Like there's dozens of them, and it's true. Like we're all doing amazing work. And the nuances are sometimes small, but to all of us in our little niche and our little world, those nuances feel very big. And one of those organizations that I met was the Parent Circle, and they like immediately moved into my heart. For so many reasons. One is that well, a lot of these organizations gave me the opportunity to meet with so many Palestinians and talk to Palestinian activists and Palestinian peacemakers and change makers. And, you know, for me, someone who was living in Israel, like that's not an opportunity that you get. That's very rare, if not impossible, to meet a Palestinian. And that's not a coincidence. It's intentionally done that way so that Israelis and Palestinians cannot meet as human beings. So first of all, it gave me the opportunity to meet incredible Palestinian change makers. And also the people who I met at the Parent Circle are the people who are, and from my, I guess, unobjective outlook, are the most incredible inspiring people that I've ever met. So the organization is made up of 750 families, Palestinians and Israelis, and all of them have lost a loved one to the conflict. So you may have met some of them. Beth just named two of them. So Aziz lost his brother when he was very young. He lost his brother to the conflict. And Maoz just recently lost, who is Israeli, just recently lost his parents on October 7th. And for Aziz, it took some time. For Maoz, it was immediate. Like immediately, Maoz knew that he was going to do something to prevent any other families from going through this pain. And for many, so from the members, it varies. Some of them, it takes them years. Laila El-Sheikh, she's a bereaved Palestinian mother. She lost her 6-month-old son, Kusai. He inhaled tear gas that the Israeli army had thrown in his village, and then he was prevented from getting medical attention. It took her 16 years after her son was killed to be able to join the Parent Circle. And that was when she joined the Parent Circle, it was the first time she talked about losing her son, because as I'm learning in Palestinian society, there isn't a lot of room to talk about bereavement. It isn't so acceptable. You have your 3 days of mourning, and then there isn't a lot of like cultural room to talk about mental health, to talk about depression, to talk about, you know, the long and lasting effects of bereavement in the family. So for 16 years, she didn't talk about her son. And now she is one of the most active members. She travels all over the world talking about not only, this isn't a self-help group. I mean, it's not like a therapy group. They use their pain, they use their stories of loss to inspire other people, right? Because if the idea is, or the premise is that if these people who have paid the highest price to the conflict can choose peace, then certainly those of us in New Hampshire surely can, or anywhere in the world for that matter. So the members, they share their stories all over Palestine and Israel, right? They go and talk in schools, and they talk in people's homes, and they talk in public events. And we run educational groups for adults and educational groups for young people, and they inspire people with those stories. They tell who they lost and why they made this choice. Why is it that they can stand up on a stage with someone from the other side and say, you know, this does not need to happen. There is an alternative, that war is not an act of fate. We've been doing this for 20 years, 25 years. Then comes October 7th. And I can tell you more about our programs if you want to ask me about them later, but I want to make sure that there's time to talk about October 7th. In some ways, October 7th changed everything. And in some ways, October 7th really just turned up the volume, right? And turned on everything that we had been doing until now. And I have to say that a year before October 7th, we were planning one of our trips to the US, and I could barely get people to, it was during the time of the democracy protests in Israel. And so all eyes were on democracy, but there is no democracy with an occupation. So, but I could not get people to really pay attention to occupation, to Palestinian human rights, to dialogue, to anything cross-border. And then October 7th comes, and now I can't get the phone to stop ringing. Not that I want it to stop ringing, right? I mean, I'm by no means, happy about what has happened, but finally people are paying attention. People are paying attention. It has become dramatically clear that this situation is not sustainable, that we can't keep going on like this, that we can't just go from ceasefire to ceasefire. We need a sustainable long-term solution. When I say October 7th, I see that there's a comment in the chat. I want to say that I mean not just the day of October 7th, but everything in its aftermath that has happened since October 7th. Many of our Palestinian members say October 7th for us was, the Palestinians living in the West Bank. On October 6th, it was just as bad, right? And October 8th, and it goes on and on and on. So I want to acknowledge that it's important to acknowledge that it's not just October 7th, it's October 7th and its aftermath, but it's also everything that has happened prior to October 7th that led up to October 7th, right? Like we are not living in a vacuum. Since October 7th and its aftermath, the phone has been off the hook. We have not stopped receiving calls, cries for help to the parent circle to help American communities heal, right? So we have now imported the conflict into our communities, and we have received, I'm like no longer shocked from the kinds of groups that we have received calls from everything from university campuses, which is not shocking because we all know what's going on campuses, all the way to the union of like a trade group of psychologists that could not get along because they were fighting about Israel and Palestine, or unions. We have now met with the hospitality unions, with the teachers unions, I was just in Houston, and I'll tell you why. I was just at the American Federation of Teachers convention in Houston. And, this is their annual convention. This is thousands of American public school teachers from all over the country coming together once a year to discuss the most important issues facing the public education system. They were talking about AI, they were talking about school vouchers, they were talking about, you name it, they were talking about it. The most heated, the most contentious issue that was debated endlessly was Israel-Palestine, was Israel and Gaza. If you did not know anything, you would think that Israel and Gaza are the biggest issues plaguing the American public education system. I'll tell you why we were there in a little bit. We decided we couldn't keep up with all of these requests, and people are hurting, people are divided. There were towns where neighbors weren't speaking to each other anymore. It was intense. And so we created a program called Listening from the Heart. But before I go into Listening from the Heart, I want to tell you that while I was in Houston, what was going on in Israel-Palestine was something even more incredible. Because Amy asked us to talk about how are Israelis and Palestinians working together, during this terrible time. While I was in Houston, our youth summer camp, which goes on every year, they were in Cyprus together. We had 50 Israelis and Palestinians in Cyprus together. Usually it takes place in Israel because the Palestinians always want to come to see the sea. They want to swim in the sea, in the Mediterranean. So we usually do it in Israel, but this year we couldn't do it in Israel. So we flew everyone to Cyprus and we held an 8-day long camp there. The kids demanded it. I mean, if our leaders could be these kids, we would be so much more successful. The kids demanded that we have this summer camp. They insisted that they see their counterparts and their friends from the other side. And we just had a webinar with them. They were incredible. One of the women, I asked her, do you have a message for everybody? What if you could give everybody one message, what would it be? And this young Palestinian woman said, is the land really worth all these souls that have been lost? And the answer, of course, is no. Of course, they're not worth it. They spent a week together learning to know each other as human beings, getting to know each other through their personal stories. They are all also bereaved. That's really the essence of the Parent Circle work, is using the personal story to inspire change and to promote empathy, understanding, humanization of the other side. Like I said, it's intentional that we don't get to meet, that Israelis and Palestinians don't get to meet each other. So if we can connect an Israeli and a Palestinian to know each other as human beings, we've beat those who don't want to see that happen. And many don't want to see that happen. The Israeli government last year, they kicked us out of Israeli public schools. They said that we were, what was it? Demoralizing. And also we were threatening like the values of the public education system. We appealed and we won. So now we can go back to schools. We have to go back to schools in a different way. Because our Palestinian members are no longer able to come into Israel as of now. So let me go back to what I was telling you about how we were dealing post October 7th. Our staff, I just want to say that our staff in Israel and Palestine and our Palestinians live only in the West Bank. Although the organization was started in with the Palestinians from Gaza, after the withdrawal from Gaza, we were no longer able to work with Palestinians from Gaza. So all of our Palestinian members live in the West Bank. It was hard. I mean, I'm not going to paint a rosy picture. Like, it was hard between our staff members, right? They have this common bond. They have a shared pain, but you have to remember that like the Palestinians saw one story on Palestinian media, news media, social media, and the Israelis had a very different experience. And so in some ways, what?
Can I jump in?
Please.
That's not unique to Parent Circle. The entire field almost collapsed after October 7. Like there were a couple of key activists from across the field that were doing work, pulling these groups back together. And, you can name it was this one and that one, and they're not specific to groups, but they were working with all the groups because the joint movement of, everybody in the joint movement for those weeks following October 7th, the whole thing nearly imploded. Like it was a really rough, I don't know, 2 months, maybe the first 2 months, Shiri? I'm not sure.
Yeah, for sure, the first 2 months. I mean, I think from what I've been hearing also from other organizations, there was an organization called Hand in Hand and With Us in Houston, which is different because it's only within Israel, but they also had terrible, the main trend was the Israelis were not getting the empathy that they wanted from the Palestinians, right? Israelis felt like, we have been supporting you all these years. We have been empathizing all of these years. Now, we need some empathy from you, and we aren't getting what we want. We aren't getting any acknowledgement. You aren't acknowledging the rape. You aren't acknowledging the torture. You aren't acknowledging what we need you to acknowledge. And on the Palestinian side, it was very much like, we've been experiencing this for years. And this is what it's been like, right? And also a lot of the stories that Israelis were hearing, the Palestinians were not hearing. And so there was like a dissonance. We recognize that people need time. So it was only recently, about 2 months ago, that our staff was able to get away and take a retreat, also in Cyprus, because again, it's hard to meet in Israel or the West Bank. And had a week-long retreat where they could just, I mean, we see each other on Zoom all the time, and they were still working during all of this time. But in person, it was the first time that they met as an organization in person, the whole staff, and had very difficult conversations, very hard conversations about empathy, about what are we doing? How are we doing? How are we promoting reconciliation? How are we doing people to people? It was nearly impossible before. And now, how are we doing it with all of these additional barriers and restrictions that are put in front of us? Okay, back to the United States, back to all of the phone calls, the phone being off the hook, back to all of the hurting communities. We decided we need to develop a peace education program, and we have just finished it. We developed it in conjunction, in partnership with Georgetown University, and it was endorsed by the American Federation of Teachers. That's why we were in Houston. They were showcasing this new program. It's called Listening from the Heart. And it's all about listening, because really, at the end of the day, it's not about history. It's not about who won each war. It's not about, who did what. It's about, I'm a human being and you are a human being. We have different narratives. How are we going to listen to each other's narratives, accept each other's narratives, even when we don't agree, even when we passionately disagree? And we saw that that's what was plaguing so many college campuses. People are just standing, waving flags and posters and not listening to each other. I'm going to show you a little trailer of this program. The program is comprised of 3 videos. Each video showcases an Israeli and a Palestinian sharing their story, followed with questions and answers. The program also has a comprehensive facilitator's guide with loads of activities. So there are preparation activities before you show the videos, the presentation activities, how to show the videos, and then processing. How do you process what you just heard and what you just saw? And I will make all of this available to you in the chat or through Amy afterwards. But I'm going to show you a little video. I just need to share my screen. This is a trailer of the videos. Can everybody see my screen? Yes? Okay.
My 10 years old daughter, Adia. They killed 5 people that day. One of the girls was my 14 years old Smadar.
When we reached the hospital, they said it's too late to save his life. Naomi came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper.
About 8:13 in the morning, they were shot with an RPG grenade, and all 4 of the soldiers, including Yanai, were killed at the post.
I heard the stories of the Israeli and how they lost their beloved ones. That was the first time I looked at them as a human like me.
If we can call each other brother, anyone can. Anyone should.
I wanted to do something to prevent other mothers, just like you and me, from experiencing this kind of thing.
If you want to make peace with your enemy, you need to work with your enemy. Then your enemy become your partner.
I'm here and I'm in terrible pain at the loss of my son, but I also see your pain.
What do you think about the international reactions the violence in Israel and Palestine.
Show empathy for one side. I'm told I'm being anti-Semitic or anti-Palestinian. How should we deal with that?
who are doing actually has an impact. How do you know?
I realized I didn't share the audio. Could you hear that okay? Yeah, okay, good. So that's listening from the heart. I'm happy to, I think it's time for questions and answers, right? Well, at least there'll be questions. I don't know if there'll be answers, but we can do our best. We can try.
Well, thank you both, Shiri and Beth, for this, your amazing work and that of everyone you are connected with in Israel and Palestine and also here. I will lead with a question and then we're going to call on some people and take some questions from the chat. I am very grateful to learn about listening from the heart. I've heard from local friends at a Unitarian church how utterly impossible it has seemed to be to find a space where people can talk about the conflict in Gaza. As soon as George Floyd was killed, right after that church was, saying Black Lives Matter, there was no question about that. When, of course, there is question in American society, but this particular congregation had no problem immediately putting out Black Lives Matter and replacing it when the flag was, the sign was torn down. Once Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a tolling of the bells every Sunday at a certain hour for Ukraine. Nothing has been said. Nothing has been said in that church about Gaza, as far as I know. It is like a third rail in the subway line that you can't touch. And people are hurting here because they know they need to talk about it. So have you found many communities that are just simply, it sounds like very similar, unable to get to the point of even having a conversation? Too scared to or too blocked to do this? And if so, what is it that allows them to get over that to begin having a conversation?
In some ways, you can't talk about it, and in some ways, you can't not talk about it, right? So I found that whatever people do, I've talked to a few local leaders, mayors. I was recently in conversation with the mayor of a local town in Hastings and Hudson, near you, Beth. Whatever she did, at first she wanted to say nothing because she said, we're just a little town in Westchester. We don't comment on international issues. We didn't comment on Ukraine. We didn't comment. We don't comment. Who are we to comment on international issues? And she got so much pressure from inside the community that eventually she felt like, okay, we need to make a statement. Now, I could have told you before she drafted and redrafted her statement a million times that she would have gotten pushback, and that's putting it nicely, from someone, right? You're never going to make anyone happy with the words that you choose or the statements that you make. And in some ways, I understand her. Who is she? A mayor of a little town in Westchester, New York, to make a statement on issues she doesn't know about. On the other hand, there are many residents of that town that felt like this issue is about them in many ways. So I think it takes leadership at some point for people to be able to talk about this issue. And I think it requires taking the politics out of a very political issue to start the conversation, to at least start the conversation. And you know, at Combatants for Peace, they do the same thing. It's about people, right? Like at Combatants, it's people who have laid down their weapons. At Parent Circle, it's people who have lost their loved ones saying, hey, this person is a human being on the other side. I know that. I've paid the highest price, and I can sit here and tell you that this person is a human being and wants peace and safety and security for her family just as much as I do. And when you humanize the conflict and when you bring it down to the people to people level, you can see that, first of all, they're the ones that pay the highest price, right? Like at the end of the day, it's the people on the ground that are paying for these wars that, you know, leaders just recklessly engage in. And actually, it's a very slow and painstaking way of making progress, but you can make progress that way. And that's the only way to make progress around having a conversation around this issue is on a human level. And that's really what Listening from the Heart is trying to do, is to create to model a human-centered approach to having this conversation. We are not going to argue about who started what, because it's a black hole that there's no end in sight, right? To go back and recount all the wars and recount
Yes.
all the terrible human rights violations that happen all the time. We're never going to get out of that. It is not a way forward.
Yes, thank you, Shiri. Beth, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think in this particular conflict, the emotion overruns people in a way that other conflicts around the world simply doesn't, for Americans in particular. I also think there's a level of privilege involved that we don't always acknowledge, that my activists like to say we don't have the luxury or the privilege of giving up hope, right? It's very easy to condemn other people's children to die. You don't even realize you're doing it, right? It's very easy to condemn other people's lives, other people's families, other people's husbands, sons, daughters. Like it's very easy to do so. And that's why you see in the peace community, consistently across the board from organization to organization, it is always people who have paid the highest price, always. So it's either people who have lost a loved one, people who have, in combatants, people who, you know, on the Israeli side, almost always they served in Gaza or the West Bank and came back incredibly traumatized. You know, Palestinians who were in jail for many years. And that's not just these two organizations, right? It's consistent over and over. That's where you see it. That's where you see the people who are willing to do the hard work, because everywhere else, it's very easy to get swept up in emotions of, you know, my story, your story, I'm right, you're wrong. And until you have that need to listen to the other in a deeper way, that like, I'm not sure how to say this like quite diplomatically, but people are very content to hate, right? They're very content to stay in their story. They're very content to not go outside of that narrative. And being part of the peace community takes an enormous amount of strength to go outside of those narratives and go outside of your comfort zone consistently over and over. And it's not like, oh, you go outside of your comfort zone once and then you're done. Every day, every day. And so that's why you see in the peace community these stories. And that's, I think, why you see the polarization elsewhere, because again, it's very easy to condemn other people. It's just when it touches you, truly touches you. And even when it touches you, 9 times out of 10, people will choose revenge, right? Like it takes an incredibly strong, special human being to choose another way.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Beth. And for us who are either combatants, ex-combatants, or bereaved parents or relatives, we still grieve, and there needs to be a space for people on different sides of the political question to grieve together. That's to acknowledge the horror of war and the tragedy. And that's what these folks locally are looking for, but hesitant to broach because of the pitfalls we can fall into so easily. I noticed that Hossam, your hand was up, and I'd like to call on you if you're still here. And it appears that perhaps Hossam is no longer here.
There's
Oh,
Hassan.
are you here? Please speak up, unmute yourself.
He can't unmute.
Oh,
So
cannot.
someone needs to unmute him.
Okay.
He is unmuted.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
I just wanted to say something for Cherry. She briefly mentioned rape accusations that was propagandized by Israelis at the beginning, and there is no single evidence for that. And even the released hostages of what they said would definitely debunk this claim. And not even that, but anyway, but I think peace is just a fancy word. Like justice is a prerequisite for peace. You can't have peace without having justice first. And I'm saying this because an Israeli TV news channel did a survey a few days ago, and the survey was, is it legitimate for Israeli to rape Palestinian prisoners? And the result was really shocking. 47% with them was siding with that idea. It's okay to rape Palestinians. So I think before,
Hossam, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Did you have a question?
yeah, I'm getting into it.
Okay.
So I think before we can talk about peace, which could be seen as just like irrational thing to happen in the coming years, I think it's better to work on educating people on justice and letting them know that they are occupying this land, and probably
Hossam,
one
what
of
is your question?
Okay, thank you.
No questions. Okay.
I'd like to speak to that comment if that's okay for a minute.
Yeah.
I'm going to go backwards with it. The first is justice without, or peace without justice. I completely agree. We will never, ever have peace until there is justice. That's simply a cause and effect and a statement of fact. There can never be peace without justice. There can never be peace without equality and equity. There will always be unrest. There will always be violence. There will always be suffering. There will always be death. There will always be pain until there is peace, equality, and justice. Full stop. Full stop. And I think the reason that October 7th wasn't surprising to so many people who are so deep into this is because, and this isn't a statement of any ethnic group, it's a statement of humanity. Whenever there is deep inequality, whenever there is apartheid and this sort of desperate level of oppression, there will always be a violent response. That's just how humans are. That's just how humans are. So I don't think that October 7th came as a surprise. And that's just one. I hope that's not offensive to say. It's not meaning to justify or rationalize any of it, just to say that that equality is a necessity in this conflict and in human relations, that dignity is an essential in human relations across the board. And if you can't provide dignity, humanity, seeing each other as full, equal human beings, you're going to have a problem, always. So and then the second thing, I'm going to speak as a woman, not necessarily as one side or the other. But when it comes to rape, I'll tell you that men of every culture and ethnic group do that to women of every culture and ethnic group. and it is not specific. So it's not Israelis do this and Palestinians don't. Palestinians do this and Israelis don't. Men rape women. And in war zones, you see this all the time. And in conflicts, you see it even more. And so that's a human problem again. And not to, sorry, Shiri, go for it.
No, I think you answered that beautifully. I would also add that the path to peace is painful, right? Like any redistribution of power to get to equity and justice is painful. It's because if I am the person in power, I have to give up something, and that is very painful to give up. I'm not going to enjoy that process. So we have to remember that there's going to be pain, discomfort, suffering on the path of peace. I'm not talking about war and deaths and losing people. I'm talking about redistribution of power, of redistribution of rights. When there's one group that's oppressed and we need to now give them, or we need to make the rights more balanced, that's going to hurt. And so we're going to avoid that at all costs, that pain.
Thank you both for a very thorough response to that. Jim, your hand is up.
Can someone unmute Jim?
Okay, thank you. Let me just say, as a combat veteran of Vietnam, what Shiri and Beth have been saying resonates so much. I remember coming home and the only thing we thought about was our side. And then a few years later is when I had to think about, on the other side, the equal to us who were in the war. We're telling one side like as if they don't exist, that they don't have feelings. So we did have a chance to have an encounter. And it was hard for some of us to how you have framed someone else. And after you've had someone hurt, some only had friends hurt. So trying to even talk with them made it hard because there's a personal side that people have to bring. Anyway, I just want to say, I love what you're saying. But here's the question I have for you. It's actually, I saw in the chat the question that Evelyn Fisher put in as to how are you viewed in Israel?
In Israel or Israel and Palestine too? Well, I mean, I guess it's probably very similar. Well, first, thank you very much for your service, Jim, and for sharing that. I saw somebody ask, like, are you a hero, an idiot, or a traitor? And I think it's all of the above, right? You know, like, I think it depends who you talk to. Like, I think, especially now, most people would consider you either an idiot or a traitor. And there is very little room right now in both societies to talk about this, right? To have this kind of conversation. Like if you talk about wanting to have a dialogue with the other side, you're looked at like you're either terribly naive or you don't care about your country. And how dare you even suggest something at such a time when everybody is so traumatized. And I think our members, at least in the parent circle, because they are bereaved, they hold a special standing in society, both in Palestine and in Israel. People stop and listen to a bereaved mother or a bereaved father because they have a whole, you know, they've paid such a high price. They have earned a sort of respect. And so people listen to them and people give them more space. But even them right now, it's very difficult. Beth, did you want to add something?
You're muted, Beth.
Thanks. I think that's true as well. I think that's true across the board. Again, combatants also has that, little bit of a special standing because they, military service, or jail time earns you props, but yeah, traitors. Yeah, it's many peace activists that I know, their families basically disown them for any number of years. There's a really amazing couple that met through combatants, and now are, again, the peace community is smaller, doing their their own organization. And she's Israeli, he's Palestinian. They got married years ago, and her family basically disowned her for until they had their first child, and then, you know, everyone wants to meet the grandkid. But it's really hard. And again, that's true across the board, across the board. And in this new group, Young Voices, that I'm working with, not only is it's just, there's also a lot of blind spots, right? So the majority of the board that's majority Israeli at this point just doesn't even see what they don't see, right? They're like, why don't we have Palestinians? Why don't Palestinians feel welcome on the board? Like, and like, it's, people don't even see their own blind spots to that point, right? So even the people who want to reach out, it's, I mean, I guess it's very similar to white privilege, right? Like, you don't even see what you don't see. So.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah. The standing that the parents have is somewhat similar to the parents of children who've been killed by gun violence,
Mhm.
who have the right, in a sense, to speak in a way that others cannot. So
Yeah.
it's
And
understandable.
Veterans for Peace, I think, is an equivalent in the States as well.
Yes, yes. Well, we have a number of questions still in the chat. I hope you've been looking at the chat. I don't think, Amy, do you want me to take time for one more question, or do you think it's time to close this section?
I'd like to add one more here that someone sent to me. Some groups and people feel that the Parents Circle, Combatants for Peace, and other similar groups normalize the occupation. And I wondered if either of you could speak to that. If you, yeah, I'll be simple with the question there. And then, yeah, we're gonna have to wrap.
You go first, Beth.
Sure, I would say yes, that is very true. There are a lot of people who think that our community at large normalizes the occupation. I think that sometimes our community at large does normalize the occupation. I think that sometimes the criticism is fair. I think that we need to be very active and clear in doing this work, that peace doesn't come before justice, and that you have to have both, right? We call ourselves the peace community. It should be the peace and justice community. You can't have one without the other. And I think when the peace community forgets that and just demands peace, then there is an element of normalizing the occupation, of making it seem like, oh, there's no occupation. But I think if you, like, as if the occupation didn't matter, just put a blanket over it, right? Just have peace the way it is, keep the status quo and be peaceful. I think there are places in the community where that's a problem. I don't think that I don't think the groups that I work with, that's usually a problem, but I can see where the criticism comes from. And I think it's really, really important that we emphasize the activism and the work that we're doing to bring about a just society and an equitable society.
Thank you, Beth. I'd like to note in the chat that Lindsay Dearborn posted information about a listening session that will be happening in the Hanover area for an interfaith community. We might want to be in touch with you, Lindsay, to learn more about that and possibly to design something similar in our areas. Shiri, do you have anything more you'd like to say before we do our closing?
So thank you all again. I put the link in the chat for the Listening from the Heart program if you want to check it out. And you can go on, that's our website in general. So feel free to I can put it in again because people are giving me a sort of a puzzled look. Maybe Amy, you want to, there you go. Send it around
Yep,
afterwards.
I see it there. Good.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I can send some information as well about some of the other work. I'll send that to you, Amy, and you can send it out. Great, thank you.
Yep, okay, great. Amy, will you posting now the information about upcoming events in the chat? And because we do want to end at 8, Hassan, apologies that we're not going to get back to you this evening. We hope that you'll stay in touch with Peace Action at the website nhpeaceaction.org and on Facebook to learn more about what's coming up programming. A couple of events. We have a ceasefire now, Vigil for Peace, that happens periodically. It'll next be Wednesday, August 14, from 2 to 3 p.m. at the office of Representative Pappas in Dover, New Hampshire. On Thursday, the 15th, from noon to 1 at City Plaza in Concord, New Hampshire. And on Wednesday, the 21st, from 2 to 3 at Senator Shaheen's office, also in Dover, New Hampshire. You'll find those all in the links Amy has just posted. And online, our next conversation will be Monday, August 26th, from 7 to 8 p.m. with Dr. Hirokazu Miyazaki, who will be speaking about citizen diplomacy for nuclear disarmament. Then on September 9th, from 7 to 8, on Zoom, we'll welcome back Joseph Gerson, who's the president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, also the convener of the Peace and Planet International Network, and co-chair of the Committee for a Sane U.S.-China Policy. Joseph will be talking about U.S.-Chinese relations. Again, these events are all, you can find them all in the chat. This series is free and open to everyone. And that said, it would be wonderful if some of you choose to support New Hampshire Peace Action and this series in particular. If you'd like to make a donation, you can go to nhpeaceaction.org/donate. Amy, is there anything more that needs to be said?
Just a big thank you to our speakers, to David for leading the hosting tonight, and for all of you who came and engaged in a conversation that is difficult and uncomfortable and absolutely critical. So thanks.
Yep. Thank you all, and good night, everyone.
Are we debriefing? Are we, it looks like Sherry's gone already.
Yeah, I was going to say that we should.
I could get her back. You want me to call her?
Sure. I popped the other people into the waiting room.
Yeah, great.
Couldn't figure out how to leave.
Don't
Don't like removing people.
Oh, there's
but-
Sherry. Yeah, pop back in. Amy's in the call still. Is that okay? Hi. Was it
Hi.
okay?
I think it went well.
Good.
Yeah, really. And I appreciate that you took Hossam's, he's, I should have warned you all that not all of our folks are great at at formulating questions, but they tend to, you know, say something and just want you to, okay, hold on. Let me see. Okay.
Can you send me his contact information because he wanted that. I
Yeah.
told him I'd send him where Combatants is speaking next.
Yeah, like we said, Doreen will send you the full, you know, the registrants.
Oh, good.
So you'll end up with everyone's on
How
there.
do we unmute Sherry?
Oh,
I'm
Oh.
back. Hi.
Well, maybe that was the debrief. Maybe you missed it, Sherry.
Oh, okay.
well, just how did both of you, how did you think it went?
I thought it went fine. Yeah,
Okay.
It was
nothing,
good.
nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay. I'm just
How do you
happy
think
to.
it went?
Oh, I was just happy to introduce Parent Circle to this little New Hampshire circle that,
Yes, thank you.
yeah. So,
And maybe any feedback on your part?
I don't think so. I mean, an hour goes fast.
Yeah,
We
an
always
hour.
wish we had more,
okay,
but that's
easy
how it
debrief.
is. Yeah, so
Great.
so yeah, I'm sure folks would have loved more time, but they have now learned about you and can follow up in other ways to get more questions or whatever answered. So I think that it was great, and I really appreciate both of you making the time for this.
And I hope I wasn't too informal. I'm like in a random place in Connecticut with no desk and no clothes. But
No, it was fine, Beth.
I tried really hard. It's like,
Yeah.
But your hair is so long.
no, it's crazy.
And as expected, you did have great things to share, right?
Oh,
Shiri?
thanks.
I knew she'd have something useful.
Yeah,
Always does.
I'm gonna
Thanks,
steal
Katie.
some of them.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Okay.
You can take all of it. You can take all of it.
So yeah, I just, I think thank you both.
Great.
And
Me?
hopefully our paths will cross again before too long. We'll keep telling folks about the work that you're doing, and if things come across, like Beth, if we'd love to have Aziz and I can't remember.
Oh, yeah. And maybe I can see if Young Voices also is interested, if you'd be open to that.
Yeah, so if you could help me make some connections.
Sure. I didn't talk
We'll
about
keep
them
it
as
going.
much as I promised I should. I just joined their board and I was like, I'll totally talk about you. And then I just didn't. But maybe I'll make a connection so they can talk about themselves.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Right.
All right. So good night and thanks again.
Thank you, guys.